Please do not let me die here. The voice was so faint that Nathan Cole almost mistook it for the wind moving through the snow-covered pines. He stopped beneath the dark branches and listened. Nothing. Then it came again, weaker this time. Please. Nathan turned toward the sound and moved through nearly 8 inches of fresh snow, following a trail that was already disappearing beneath the storm. He had been inspecting Blackwood's northern boundary alone, something his security team strongly disliked, when the weather changed faster than expected. Now, less than 200 feet from the territorial line, he found a woman collapsed beneath a pine tree. She looked to be in her late 20s. Long brown hair clung damply around her pale face, and her winter coat was far too light for the temperature. Nathan immediately removed his own coat and wrapped it around her. Her eyes opened slightly, blue-gray, frightened. "Can you hear me?" he asked. She tried to answer, but her voice failed. "You are safe. I am getting you out of here." At the word safe, something changed in her expression. Her hand suddenly closed around his sleeve with surprising determination. "No." Nathan leaned closer. "What is it?" Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes searched the forest behind him. "They know." "Who knows?" "They know I crossed into your territory." Nathan became completely still. She knew where she was. More importantly, she knew whose territory she had entered. "What is your name?" he asked. Her grip weakened. "Grace." "Grace what?" "Morgan." Her eyes closed again. "Stay awake, Grace." Nathan reached for his phone, but there was no signal beneath the heavy storm. The nearest ranger road was more than a mile away, while one of Blackwood's private hunting cabins stood less than half that distance east. The decision took him less than a second. He lifted her carefully and started toward the cabin. Grace barely moved, but every few minutes Nathan spoke to her, asking simple questions just to keep her responding. Her favorite season? Summer. Her favorite drink? Coffee. Whether she hated snow. "I do now," she whispered. Despite everything, Nathan almost smiled. "Good. Keep talking. You ask terrible questions. Then stay awake long enough to complain about them." By the time the cabin appeared through the trees, Nathan could barely see 20 feet ahead. He carried Grace inside, turned on the emergency heat, and placed her near the fireplace before finding blankets and the medical supplies stored in the kitchen. His satellite phone connected immediately. "Ethan," Nathan said when his chief security officer answered. "Send Dr. Harris to the northern hunting cabin." Silence followed. "Are you injured?" "No." Nathan looked toward Grace. "I found someone." Less than 40 minutes later, the doctor arrived with 2 security vehicles. Grace remained barely conscious while Dr. Harris examined her. Nathan stood nearby, answering every question he could. How long had she been outside? Unknown. Had she fallen? Unknown. Did he know her? No. Finally, the doctor looked at him. "She needs warmth, fluids, and constant monitoring tonight. Moving her again in this weather would create unnecessary risk. Then she stays here." Ethan glanced at Nathan. "The council is expecting you back. They can wait." Nathan looked toward the woman sleeping beneath several blankets. He did not understand why she had crossed into Blackwood territory or who she believed was following her. But he understood one thing clearly. Grace Morgan had entered his forest expecting she might never leave it. Nathan turned toward Ethan. "Double the boundary patrols." Quietly, Ethan studied him. "You think someone followed her?" Nathan remembered the fear in Grace's eyes. "I think she does." From across the room came a weak voice. "Nathan Cole." Every person in the cabin turned. Grace's eyes remained closed. Nathan stared at her. He had never introduced himself. Grace did not open her eyes again for nearly 3 hours. Nathan remained in the cabin while the storm buried the road beneath another 6 inches of snow. Dr. Harris checked her condition regularly. Ethan coordinated the boundary patrols, and 2 security officers waited outside. No one mentioned the council again. Nathan sat across from the fireplace, watching the stranger who somehow knew his name. At midnight, Dr. Harris finally stepped away from the sofa. "Her condition is improving. She is responding to treatment, but someone should remain nearby until morning." "I will." Ethan looked at Nathan. "You have people for that." "I know." "Then why are you staying?" Nathan glanced toward Grace. "Because she spoke my name." Ethan lowered his voice. "Half the territory knows your name." She was barely conscious. That makes it stranger, not necessarily dangerous. Nathan knew that. He also knew fear when he saw it. Grace had not entered Blackwood accidentally. She had been running towards something, or away from someone, and either possibility concerned him. Shortly after 1 in the morning, Dr. Harris left for the neighboring staff cabin to rest. Ethan remained another hour before Nathan ordered him back to Blackwood. "Call me if the patrols find anything. And if she wakes, I will call you." Ethan paused at the door. "You are the Alpha King, Nathan. You do not have to personally guard every stranger who crosses the border. Tonight I do." When the door closed, silence settled over the cabin. Nathan added another piece of wood to the fireplace and returned to his chair. Around 3 in the morning, Grace began moving beneath the blankets. Her eyes opened suddenly. She looked toward the ceiling, then the windows, then Nathan. Fear returned immediately. "Where am I?" A private cabin inside Blackwood territory. She tried to sit up too quickly. "Easy." Nathan remained several feet away. "Dr. Harris said you need rest." Grace stared at him. "Who are you?" Nathan studied her face. There was no recognition in her expression. "Nathan Cole." The color seemed to leave her face. "What? You said my name earlier." "No, you did." Grace shook her head. "I have never met you." "I did not say you had." She looked toward the door. "I need to leave. The road is buried under snow, and you can barely stand." "You do not understand." "Then explain it to me." Grace fell silent. Nathan waited. He had spent years sitting through negotiations where silence was used as a weapon. This silence was different. Grace was not calculating what to reveal. She appeared to be deciding what she was allowed to remember. "I was traveling north," she finally said. "My car stopped several miles from here." "Why did you leave the road?" "I thought someone was following me." "Who?" "I do not know." Nathan watched her carefully. "You told me they knew you crossed into my territory." Grace frowned. "I said that." "Yes." Her confusion looked genuine. Nathan reached for a glass of water and placed it on the table within her reach without moving closer. Grace took it slowly. "I remember the snow," she whispered. "I remember walking through the trees. Then nothing until now." Nathan noticed her coat hanging near the fireplace. Something metallic caught the light from inside one pocket. "Is that yours?" Grace followed his gaze. "My coat. Something is inside it." She nodded cautiously. Nathan brought the coat to her. Grace searched the pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant on a faded chain. The moment Nathan saw the symbol engraved across its surface, every question in his mind changed. A crescent moon crossed by 3 narrow mountain peaks. He had seen that mark only once before, inside records his father had ordered sealed 22 years ago. Nathan looked at Grace. "Where did you get this?" She closed her fingers around the pendant. "It belonged to my mother." "What was her name?" Grace hesitated. "Eleanor Morgan." Nathan stood completely still. The name meant nothing to him. The symbol did. Silver Ridge had vanished from every official map before Grace was old enough to remember it. Yet she was carrying its crest around her neck. Grace watched his expression. "What is wrong?" Nathan looked toward the dark windows, suddenly understanding that whoever had followed her might not simply be looking for a missing Omega. "Grace," he said quietly, "I think someone has been keeping the truth about your life from you." Grace stared at Nathan as if the room had shifted beneath her. "What truth?" Nathan did not answer immediately. The fire cracked softly between them while snow pressed against the windows. He knew fragments of Silver Ridge history, but fragments were dangerous when spoken as certainty. "The symbol on your pendant belonged to a territory called Silver Ridge," he said. Grace looked down at the silver piece in her palm. "My mother told me it was a family symbol. Maybe it was both. I have never heard of Silver Ridge." Nathan believed her. Confusion was difficult to fake when it reached the eyes. Most people have not. It disappeared from official records more than 20 years ago. Grace tightened her fingers around the pendant. Places do not disappear. Records can. She looked at him sharply. "And you know this because you are the Alpha King?" Nathan nodded. Grace leaned back against the sofa, exhausted but determined to remain awake. "My mother raised me outside every packed territory she could find. We moved constantly when I was young. Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Colorado. She always said she preferred quiet places." "Did she ever explain why?" "No." Grace gave a humorless smile. "I thought she was restless." Nathan considered everything she had told him. "When did she die?" 6 years ago. Her voice softened. "After that, I stopped moving." "Where did you settle?" "A small town near Fort Collins. I worked at a garden center and studied herbal medicine on my own." Nathan glanced at the pendant again. "What brought you north?" Grace hesitated. A letter. Nathan waited. It arrived 4 days ago without a return address. It said my mother had lied about who I was. Did it mention Silver Ridge? No. It told me to drive to an address near the Wyoming border if I wanted answers. Nathan's expression hardened. And you went alone? Grace looked offended. I did not know I needed an army. You received an anonymous letter claiming your dead mother hid your identity. When you say it like that, it sounds questionable. Because it was questionable. Thank you. I understand that now. Despite himself, Nathan almost smiled. Grace noticed. Did the Alpha King just find my terrible judgment amusing? No. You almost smiled. You are recovering remarkably quickly. I am choosing to take that as praise. The tension eased for only a moment. Then Grace looked toward the window. There was a dark sport utility vehicle behind me for almost 30 miles. When my car stopped, I waited. The vehicle passed me, but later I saw headlights again. I left the road because I saw a sign marking Blackwood territory. Nathan understood. You thought they would not follow you across the boundary. I hoped. Why Blackwood? Grace looked directly at him. Because my mother once told me that if I was ever truly afraid and had nowhere else to go, I should find Nathan Cole. Silence filled the cabin. Nathan forgot the storm. She used my name? Yes. When I was 16. Nathan calculated immediately. 12 years ago. His father had still been alive then, and Nathan had only recently begun representing Blackwood in regional affairs. Did she explain why? She said you would understand something she could never tell me. Nathan slowly sat down. I never met a woman named Eleanor Morgan. Grace searched his face. Then why would she trust you? I do not know. The answer clearly disappointed her, but Nathan refused to invent certainty where none existed. Grace closed her eyes for a moment. So my mother gave me a symbol from a forgotten territory, told me to find a man she apparently never met, and someone followed me after an anonymous letter sent me toward Blackwood. That is what we know. That is not comforting. It was not intended to be. Grace opened her eyes again. What happens now? Nathan looked toward the windows. Dawn was beginning to lighten the snow beyond the glass. Now you recover. I find out who sent the letter, and we learn why your mother knew my name. Grace studied him carefully. Why would you do that for me? Nathan remembered finding her beneath the pine tree, still fighting to stay conscious when surrender would have been easier. Because someone expected you to disappear in that forest, he said. And they were wrong. At that moment, Nathan's phone rang. Ethan's voice came through immediately. We found Grace's car. Nathan stood. Anything unusual? Ethan was silent for half a second. Yes. There was another vehicle parked less than a quarter-mile away. Grace went still. Nathan turned toward the window. Did you identify it? Not yet. But Nathan, whoever was driving it, never left the area. Nathan's gaze moved to Grace. Ethan continued. We found fresh tracks leading directly toward Blackwood territory. Grace looked toward the cabin door before Nathan had even ended the call. They followed me here. We do not know that yet. Fresh tracks leading toward Blackwood territory seemed fairly convincing. Nathan could not argue with that. He turned back to the phone. Ethan, increase patrols around the northern sector and check every road camera between the highway and Grace's car. Do not approach anyone unless there is a clear reason. I want information, not panic. Understood. When the call ended, Grace pushed the blankets aside. I am leaving. Nathan stepped between her and the door without moving closer than necessary. You can barely walk across this room. Then I will walk slowly. Grace, if someone came here because of me, I will not sit inside your territory and make this your problem. You crossed my boundary asking for help. That made it my concern. She looked up at him. I did not ask you to protect me. You asked me not to let you die. The word stopped her. Nathan's voice softened. I am trying to respect both requests. Grace looked away, visibly frustrated by the logic. You cannot keep me here. I will not. Nathan moved away from the door. If you decide to leave, I will not imprison you. But Dr. Harris has not cleared you to travel. The roads are still dangerous, and someone may be searching for you. I am asking you to stay until we know more. Grace studied him for several seconds. Asking? Yes. Alpha Kings ask. Occasionally. That must be difficult for you. Extremely. A reluctant smile touched her face before exhaustion replaced it. She returned to the sofa. By late morning, the storm had weakened. Dr. Harris checked Grace again and confirmed that she was recovering well but needed another day of rest. Nathan remained at the cabin, working from the dining table while Ethan sent updates from Blackwood. Grace watched him answer calls, review documents, and quietly rearrange an entire day of royal responsibilities without once complaining that she had disrupted his life. "Do you always work this much?" she asked. Nathan looked up from a report. "Do you always question people who rescued you from snowstorms?" "Only when they look miserable doing paperwork. This is my natural expression." "That is unfortunate." Nathan almost smiled again. Grace noticed and looked pleased with herself. Hours later, Ethan arrived carrying a sealed evidence bag containing the anonymous letter recovered from Grace's car. Nathan placed it on the table. Grace read the message again, her expression tightening. "That is exactly how it arrived." Ethan pointed toward the bottom corner. "The paper carries a watermark." Nathan held it toward the window. 3 narrow mountain peaks appeared beneath a crescent moon. Grace instinctively touched the pendant around her neck. "Silver Ridge." Nathan nodded. Ethan placed another folder on the table. "There is more. We checked archived property records. Silver Ridge was not destroyed or abandoned." Nathan looked at him sharply. "Then what happened?" "The territory was legally dissolved and divided among 3 neighboring pacts 22 years ago." Grace frowned. "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "Officially, because its ruling family disappeared." The cabin became very quiet. Grace looked down at her pendant. "My mother was not royalty." Nathan said nothing. Ethan opened the folder and slid an old photograph across the table. It showed several people standing outside a mountain lodge decades earlier. Nathan recognized his father immediately. Beside him stood a young woman with long brown hair and familiar blue-gray eyes. Grace stopped breathing for a moment. "That is my mother." Nathan stared at the photograph. Eleanor Morgan had known his father. Grace slowly turned it over. A handwritten message covered the back. Nathan read the first line, then looked at Grace. The words had been written more than 20 years earlier. "If anything happens to me, protect my daughter. Her name is Grace." Grace read the message 3 times before setting the photograph down. "My mother knew your father." Nathan remained silent for a moment. Apparently better than either of us knew. Ethan studied the archived documents spread across the table. The photograph was stored in a restricted Blackwood file under an old territorial agreement. Someone removed most of the supporting records years ago. Grace looked at Nathan. "Someone inside Blackwood?" "Possibly. That is comforting." "You have an unusual definition of comforting." "I learned it from you." Ethan glanced between them, then gathered the documents. "I will continue searching the archives." Quietly, Nathan nodded. "Do not tell the council about Grace yet." Grace immediately looked at him. "Why not?" "Because until I know who removed those records, I do not know who can be trusted with your identity." Ethan left shortly afterward, taking the evidence with him. For the first time since Grace had awakened, the cabin became completely quiet. She stood near the window, staring at the snow-covered forest. "My whole life suddenly feels like a story someone edited before giving it to me." Nathan remained several feet behind her. "Your life is still yours." "Is it?" "I do not even know why my mother kept moving us." "She kept you alive." Grace turned toward him. "That does not mean she told me the truth." Nathan understood the difference. Protection could become another kind of prison when it removed every choice from the person being protected. "Then we find the truth," he said. "And after that, you decide what it means." Grace studied him. "You make everything sound simple." "Nothing about this is simple." "Good. I was worried you had missed that." Nathan almost smiled. By afternoon, Dr. Harris allowed Grace to walk around the cabin as long as she rested frequently. She immediately ignored the second half of those instructions and wandered into the kitchen. Nathan found her examining the refrigerator. "What are you doing?" "Looking for food." "There is food." Grace stared at the contents. "There are ingredients." "That is different." "I can cook." She looked at him with open skepticism. "You are an alpha king living in a cabin with 6 eggs, mustard, and something I am afraid to identify." "It is cheese." That answer does not improve the situation. 20 minutes later, Grace was sitting at the counter while Nathan attempted to make scrambled eggs. She watched him in silence until he finally looked at her. "What?" "Nothing." "You are judging me." "I am trying to understand how someone responsible for an entire territory is losing an argument with a frying pan." "The pan is defective." "Of course." Her laughter was quiet, but it changed the room. Nathan realized he had not heard anyone laugh inside that cabin in years. He placed a plate in front of her. Grace took one bite, and considered it seriously. Acceptable. That sounded painful. I believe in honest leadership. For a few minutes, Silver Ridge disappeared. There were no hidden records, anonymous letters, or unknown vehicles. There was only a woman recovering at a kitchen counter and a man discovering that his private cabin felt unexpectedly less empty with someone else inside it. That evening, Grace fell asleep on the sofa while reading one of the old books from the shelf. Nathan covered her with a blanket and turned toward the window. Something pale rested against the outside glass. He stepped closer. A small envelope had been placed on the windowsill. Nathan opened the door and scanned the quiet clearing. No one was visible. He picked up the envelope and returned inside. There was no name written on it, only the Silver Ridge symbol. Nathan opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper containing 6 words. The girl does not belong to you. Nathan looked toward Grace, sleeping peacefully across the room. Then he turned the note over. Another message had been written on the back. Send her out before the next moon. Grace woke just after sunrise and knew immediately that something had changed. Nathan stood near the window with his phone in one hand and the anonymous note in the other. His expression controlled in the way people looked when they were trying very hard not to worry someone. What happened? She asked. Nathan turned. Someone left this outside last night. Grace read the message without speaking. When she reached the final sentence, her face tightened. They were close enough to touch the cabin. Yes. And nobody saw them? The patrol route left a 12-minute gap on this side of the property. Grace looked toward the trees beyond the window. That sounds convenient. Nathan had reached the same conclusion. Ethan is reviewing it. She handed the note back. You should move me somewhere else. I intend to. That is not what I meant. Somewhere outside Blackwood. Nathan studied her. Why? Because whoever wants me clearly has no problem entering your territory. That is exactly why sending you away makes no sense. Nathan, this started before I met you. And now someone has entered my land, approached my cabin, and delivered a message about a woman under my protection. It stopped being only your problem. Grace's expression changed at the word protection. Nathan noticed immediately. That came out wrong. Did it? You are free to leave whenever you choose. But you think I should stay? Yes. Because you are the king. Because someone wants you frightened enough to run before you understand why. Grace fell silent. Nathan placed the note on the table. I will not tell you what decision to make. But do not make it for the person who wrote that message. For several seconds, she simply looked at him. You are frustratingly reasonable when you want to be. I will try not to make it a habit. By noon, Ethan arrived with news that made the cabin feel even smaller. 3 representatives from a northern territory called Red Hollow had reached Blackwood's main gate requesting an official meeting. They claimed they were searching for a missing member of their community, an Omega named Grace Morgan. I have never lived in Red Hollow, Grace said immediately. Ethan nodded. They brought documents saying otherwise. Nathan's eyes narrowed. What documents? Birth registration, guardianship records, and a statement claiming Grace disappeared after experiencing emotional distress. Grace stared at him. That is a lie. I believe you, Nathan said. She looked surprised by how quickly he answered. Ethan placed copies of the records on the table. Grace examined them one by one. Her name was correct. Her birth date was correct. Even her mother's name appeared exactly as she remembered it. Then she stopped. This is wrong. Nathan moved closer, but waited for her to point. Grace touched one line near the bottom of the oldest document. It says my mother was born in Wyoming. Was she not? Ethan asked. Grace shook her head. She was born in Maine. She complained about the winters there every year of my childhood. Nathan looked at Ethan. Verify it. Ethan immediately made the call. 10 minutes later, the answer came back. A birth certificate for Eleanor Morgan existed in Portland, Maine. The Red Hollow documents were false. Grace released a slow breath. So someone created an entire history for me. Not recently, Ethan said. The records appear to have been entered into regional archives more than 20 years ago. Nathan looked toward the Silver Ridge pendant resting against Grace's sweater. Someone had prepared this story when she was still a child. What do the representatives want? Grace asked. Ethan's expression became serious. They want you returned to Red Hollow voluntarily. And if I refuse? They claim they will request a formal council hearing. Grace looked at Nathan. Can they do that? They can request anything. That was not my question. Nathan held her gaze. No one can legally force you to go with them. Grace nodded slowly. but Nathan could see the fear behind her composure. Then I want to meet them. Both men stared at her. Absolutely not, Nathan said. Grace raised an eyebrow. Nathan corrected himself. I strongly advise against it. Better. She picked up the false documents. If these people build a life for me that I never lived, I want to hear them explain it. 2 hours later, Nathan and Grace arrived at Blackwood's main residence under discreet security. The 3 visitors waited inside a private reception room. The oldest man stood when Grace entered. His expression changed instantly. Not surprise. Recognition. Grace, he said softly. She stopped beside Nathan. Have we met? The man looked at the pendant around her neck. Not since you were 4 years old. Grace went completely still. Then the stranger said the one thing Nathan had not expected. Your mother did not take you away from us, Grace. She took you away from him. The man's eyes moved directly to Nathan. The room went silent. Grace looked from the stranger to Nathan, but Nathan appeared just as surprised as she was. Explain what you mean, Nathan said. The older man remained standing. My name is Richard Hale. I served Silver Ridge before it was dissolved. Grace tightened her grip on the false records. You said my mother took me away from him. Richard nodded toward Nathan. Not Nathan. His father. Nathan's expression changed. Be very careful with what you say next. I expected that response. Richard reached slowly into his coat and placed an old envelope on the table. Your father, King William Cole, helped negotiate the dissolution of Silver Ridge. Nathan knew that much. What he did not know was why his father had hidden photographs and correspondence connected to Grace. And my mother? Grace asked. Eleanor Morgan was born Eleanor Vale. She belonged to the family responsible for Silver Ridge's leadership. Grace stared at him. My mother never used that name. Because she was protecting you. Richard pushed the envelope forward. After Silver Ridge was divided, several groups wanted control of the remaining land rights. Your mother believed your existence would be used to challenge every agreement that followed. Grace did not touch the envelope. Then why create false records claiming I belong to Red Hollow? Richard's confidence weakened. To establish legal protection. Protection for whom? Grace asked. No one answered. Nathan watched the 3 representatives carefully. You arrived claiming Grace was emotionally distressed and needed to be returned. That does not sound like protection. Richard looked toward the 2 people beside him. Those documents were prepared long before I became involved. Convenient, Grace said. Richard faced her again. You are the last direct descendant of the Silver Ridge ruling family. Certain territorial agreements cannot be permanently finalized without your consent. Grace gave a quiet, disbelieving laugh. I sell medicinal herbs and teach weekend gardening classes. I do not control territories. Legally, you may. Nathan finally understood why someone had drawn her north. Grace was not simply a missing Omega. She was a signature people had been waiting 20 years to obtain. What do you want her to sign? Nathan asked. Richard's silence answered before his words did. Red Hollow wants to settle the remaining claims. Grace stepped closer to the table. There it is. Richard frowned. Grace, you do not understand the situation. Then explain it without pretending you came because you were worried about me. Nathan said nothing. This was her question, and he would not take it from her. Richard slowly sat down. Silver Ridge land contains important transportation routes and valuable development rights. The uncertainty surrounding your legal status has prevented several agreements. So you found me. We tried to contact you. You sent an anonymous letter. Richard looked genuinely confused. No. Grace froze. Nathan exchanged a glance with Ethan. You did not send her toward the Wyoming border? Nathan asked. We did not know where she was until 3 days ago. Then how did you know she was in Blackwood? Richard hesitated. Someone contacted us. Nathan's voice became colder. Who? The message was anonymous. Ethan immediately stepped forward. How was it delivered? Through a secure council channel. Nathan looked at him. Only a limited number of officials could access those channels. Someone inside the regional political system had known exactly where Grace was. Grace finally opened the old envelope. Inside was a photograph of her as a small child standing beside her mother. Behind them stood Nathan's father. On the back, Eleanor had written a date and a single sentence. William, if they find her, do not let anyone decide her future for her. Nathan read the words twice. Grace looked at him. Your father knew everything. It appears so. And he never told you. Nathan shook his head. Richard stood again. Whatever secrets existed between our parents, Grace still needs to come with us. Red Hollow can protect her legal interests. Grace looked directly at him. No. Richard seemed genuinely startled. You have not heard our proposal. You introduced yourself with a fake version of my life. I have heard enough. Nathan almost smiled. Richard turned toward him. You cannot keep her here. Nathan's expression became calm. I am not keeping her anywhere. Grace placed the documents back on the table. I am staying because I choose to. Richard's eyes narrowed. Then understand this. Other groups will come when they learn she has been found. Nathan looked toward Grace, but she did not step back. Richard continued. And not everyone will ask as politely as we did. After the representatives left, Ethan closed the reception room door. We have a larger problem. Nathan turned toward him. Ethan placed his phone on the table. I traced the secure message that told Red Hollow where Grace was. Nathan immediately understood from Ethan's expression that he would not like the answer. Where did it originate? Ethan looked toward the hallway leading deeper into Blackwood's residence. Inside this building. Ethan's words changed the atmosphere immediately. Nathan looked toward the closed reception room door, then back at his chief security officer. How certain are you? The message passed through a council terminal registered to the East Administrative Wing. How many people have access? Grace asked. Ethan considered the question. 12. That is 11 too many, she said. Nathan almost agreed. He instructed Ethan to preserve the access records without alerting anyone and move Grace to a private suite in the oldest section of the residence. She noticed immediately that 2 security officers remained in the hallway. You said I would not be a prisoner. You are not. There are guards outside my door. They are guarding the hallway. Grace gave him a look. That is impressively creative. Nathan sighed. You can leave the room whenever you want. You can leave Blackwood whenever you want. I am asking you to tell me before you do either, so I can make sure no one follows you. Her expression softened slightly. That sounds more reasonable. I am learning. Later that afternoon, Nathan took Grace to the private archive beneath the Western Library. If his father had hidden information about Eleanor, Nathan believed the answers would be there. They searched for hours through sealed agreements and correspondence from the final years of Silver Ridge. Grace sat cross-legged on the floor beside an open storage box, while Nathan worked through a cabinet of territorial records. Your father kept everything, she said. Except explanations. Parents seem to enjoy that tradition. Nathan looked at her. You are handling this remarkably well. Grace gave a tired smile. I discovered that my childhood may have been built around a political secret. Strangers created a false identity for me, and someone inside your home is apparently sharing information about my location. I am postponing the breakdown until Thursday. Nathan laughed before he could stop himself. Grace stared at him. There. You do know how. How what? Laugh. Do not tell anyone. Your reputation would never recover. The moment was small, but something settled between them. Nathan had spent years surrounded by people who measured every word around him. Grace did not seem impressed by his title, and strangely, he found that more comforting than respect. She returned to the box and suddenly became still. Nathan. He crossed the room. Grace held an unopened letter addressed to William Cole in Eleanor's handwriting. Nathan carefully opened it and read aloud. William, I have changed her name and removed every connection I can find. If Silver Ridge is ever reopened, Grace must decide for herself whether she wants any part of it. Promise me no king, council, or pack will claim authority over her. Grace looked down. She knew. Yes. Nathan continued reading. The final lines changed everything. Eleanor had written that one person inside Blackwood knew where Grace had been taken. A council advisor named Marcus Vale. Grace frowned. Vale was my mother's real last name. Nathan nodded slowly. He may have been family. They searched the current council directory. Marcus had retired years earlier, but his son remained one of Nathan's senior advisors. Daniel Vale. Nathan immediately called Ethan. The response came within minutes. Daniel's access credentials had been used in the East Administrative Wing the night the message was sent. Grace stood beside the archive table. So we found him. We found a connection, Nathan corrected. Not proof. Grace nodded. Still frustratingly reasonable. When they returned upstairs, Ethan was waiting with another discovery. Daniel Vale had left Blackwood less than an hour earlier, claiming a family emergency. Nathan looked toward Grace. Where did he go? Ethan handed him a printed travel authorization. North. Grace's expression changed. Toward Red Hollow? Beyond it, Ethan said. Toward what used to be Silver Ridge. Nathan studied the authorization. Daniel had requested access to an abandoned government property there 3 days before Grace ever entered Blackwood territory. He knew she was coming, Nathan said. Grace looked at him. Then Ethan placed one final document on the table. There is something else. Daniel requested this from the regional archives 6 months ago. Nathan read the title. Restoration of Dissolved Territorial Authority. Grace went silent. Ethan continued. If Grace signs the right documents, Silver Ridge can legally exist again. Nathan looked at her. The mystery was finally beginning to take shape. Someone had not brought Grace north merely to control old land rights. Someone wanted to rebuild a territory around her. And judging by the false identity, anonymous messages, and secrets inside Blackwood, they had been preparing for years. Grace read the restoration document twice before placing it on Nathan's desk. Someone wants Silver Ridge back. Yes, Nathan said. And they need me to make it happen. Possibly. Grace gave him a tired look. You know, when you say possibly, it usually means definitely with several unpleasant details missing. Nathan leaned back in his chair. I am trying not to decide the truth before we have evidence. There is that frustrating reasonableness again. Ethan stood near the window, reviewing the access records on his tablet. Daniel Vale began researching restoration procedures 6 months ago. 3 months later, someone accessed sealed records connected to Eleanor Morgan. Last week, Daniel requested permission to inspect the abandoned Silver Ridge Administrative Lodge. Grace folded her arms. Then I received the letter. 4 days ago, Nathan said. And someone made certain Red Hollow learned where you were after you arrived here. Grace walked toward the window. Beyond the glass, Blackwood stretched beneath a clear winter sky, peaceful in a way her life no longer felt. Why would Daniel want to restore a territory he does not control? Nathan exchanged a glance with Ethan. Because he may believe he can control the person who legally restores it. Grace turned. Me. No one needed to answer. That evening, Nathan called an emergency meeting with only his most trusted advisors. Grace asked to attend. Several council members objected the moment she entered the room. This concerns territorial SEC. Grace read Daniel's message again the next morning, but the words had not become less unsettling. Nathan stood across from her in the library, waiting for the decision he clearly hoped she would not make. I am going, she said. Nathan's jaw tightened. I assumed you would say that. Then why do you look surprised? I was hoping sleep might improve your judgment. Your cooking survived my criticism. You can survive this. Under different circumstances, he might have smiled. Instead, he placed a map on the table. The old Silver Ridge Lodge is nearly 40 miles north. You will not go alone. Daniel specifically said alone. Daniel also lied to everyone for months. I am not respecting his preferences. Grace studied the map. If he sees security, he might leave. Then Ethan and his team stay out of sight. I will take you to the property and wait outside. Grace looked at him. You really hate this plan. More than my cooking. That finally earned a small smile. 2 hours later, they reached the abandoned Silver Ridge Lodge. The building stood beneath tall pines, weathered but carefully maintained. Nathan stopped at the entrance. If you want to leave at any moment, we leave. Grace nodded and stepped inside. Daniel Vale waited in the main room beside a long table covered with old documents. He was in his early 50s, dressed more like an accountant than a conspirator. You brought him, Daniel said. I chose to, Grace replied. Daniel looked at Nathan. Just like your father. Always standing beside decisions that were never his to make. Nathan remained calm. Then speak to Grace. Daniel turned toward her. Your mother was my aunt. That makes us family. Grace felt the revelation without allowing it to control her expression. Family usually introduces itself before creating false identities. Those records protected you. Everyone keeps saying that after lying to me. Daniel lowered his eyes. Eleanor believed Silver Ridge could never be restored safely. My father disagreed. He wanted you raised here, prepared to reclaim what belonged to your family. Eleanor took you away before anyone could stop her. And Nathan's father? Grace asked. William helped her disappear. Nathan's expression changed. Daniel continued. That is why your mother told you to find Nathan if you were ever in danger. She trusted William's son to honor the same promise. Grace looked at Nathan. Suddenly, the mystery of her mother's instructions made painful sense. Then why did you bring me back? She asked Daniel. Because Silver Ridge deserves to exist again. That is not an answer. Daniel placed a document before her. With your signature, the restoration process begins. Grace did not touch it. And who governs this restored territory? Daniel hesitated. You would hold the legal authority. While you advise me? Silence answered. Grace almost laughed. So everyone was right. You do not want me. You want my signature. I want to restore your inheritance. An inheritance I never asked for. Daniel's expression hardened with frustration. You cannot spend your life running from what you are. Grace looked directly at him. I was not running until people like you started chasing me. Nathan remained silent, allowing her words to belong entirely to her. Daniel pushed another folder across the table. Then read this before you walk away. Inside were letters written by Eleanor during the final months before she disappeared with Grace. One sentence appeared repeatedly. Grace must choose. Grace closed the folder. My mother already gave you my answer. Daniel stared at her. You would abandon Silver Ridge? I would abandon anyone who believes my freedom is less important than their plans. She turned toward the door. Nathan followed without a word. Outside, cold mountain air filled Grace's lungs. She had expected relief. Instead, tears suddenly blurred her vision. Nathan stopped several feet away. He did not touch her. He simply waited. My mother spent her whole life protecting my choices, Grace whispered. And I spent years believing she did not trust me with the truth. Nathan's voice was gentle. Both things can be true. Grace wiped her eyes. I do not know what I am supposed to do now. Nathan looked back at the lodge, then at her. For once, nothing. Grace frowned. Nothing. You do not owe Silver Ridge an answer today. You do not owe Blackwood one either. Come back with me. Rest. Decide when the decision belongs to you instead of everyone waiting around you. Grace looked at the man who had saved her life and had never once demanded that she repay him with obedience. In that moment, she understood why her mother had trusted his name. Then Ethan approached from the tree line with a phone in his hand. Nathan, we have a problem. Nathan turned. What happened? Daniel was not the person who sent Grace the original letter. Grace went still. Ethan continued. We traced the mailing records this morning. The letter was sent from Blackwood. Nathan's expression darkened. By whom? Ethan looked directly at him. Councilman Robert Hayes. Councilman Robert Hayes was waiting when Nathan, Grace, and Ethan returned to Blackwood. He sat alone in the council chamber, his hands folded calmly on the table as if he had expected them. Nathan closed the doors behind them. You sent the letter. Hayes did not deny it. Yes. Grace stepped forward. Why? Hayes looked at her with an expression that almost resembled regret. Because Daniel Vale was preparing to restore Silver Ridge, and I knew he needed you. I wanted you found before he could control the situation. So you manipulated me instead. I gave you a path to the truth. Grace shook her head. You sent me into unfamiliar territory without telling me what I was walking into. Someone followed me. I nearly died in that forest. Hayes lowered his eyes. That was never supposed to happen. Nathan's voice remained dangerously quiet. Intent does not erase consequence. Hayes looked at him. If I had approached Grace openly, Daniel would have known immediately. I believed getting her into Blackwood was the safest option. Grace stared at him. You could have written one honest sentence. Go to Nathan Cole. Instead, you made me afraid enough to run. Hayes had no answer. Ethan placed a folder on the table. There is more. Councilman Hayes accessed Grace's archived records repeatedly over the last year. Nathan turned toward him. Why? Hayes slowly stood. Because your father asked me to watch for her name. Nathan went still. Hayes continued. William knew Eleanor might someday send Grace back. Before he died, he told me that if she appeared, I was to make certain she reached you before anyone else found her. Grace looked between them. Then why all the secrecy? Because Daniel had people monitoring official channels. I made the wrong choice, Grace. I thought fear would move you faster than trust. Grace absorbed the words. It did. Her voice was quiet. It almost moved me into a grave beneath a pine tree. No one spoke. Hayes finally nodded. I am sorry. Nathan ordered a formal investigation into every record Hayes and Daniel had accessed, but Grace surprised everyone with her next decision. I am leaving Blackwood tomorrow. Nathan looked at her. For one brief second, the king disappeared, and Grace saw only the man who had stayed beside her through the coldest night of her life. Where will you go? Back to Colorado first. I need to see my home. My real life. I need to decide what I want without Silver Ridge, Red Hollow, or this council standing around me. Nathan wanted to tell her that leaving was dangerous. He wanted to ask her to stay. Instead, he remembered every promise he had made. All right. Grace searched his face. That is it. No. Nathan managed a faint smile. I think it is a terrible idea. She almost laughed. There he is. But the choice is yours. The next morning, Nathan walked with Grace to the front gates. Ethan had arranged a secure vehicle and a driver, but Grace would decide the route and destination. Snow covered the surrounding hills, bright beneath the morning sun. When I found you, Nathan said, I thought keeping you alive was the difficult part. Grace looked at him. What was the difficult part? Learning that protecting someone sometimes means opening the gate. Her eyes filled with emotion, but she smiled. You are getting better at this. At losing arguments. At understanding people. Grace stepped closer, stopping just before him. You saved my life, Nathan. You do not owe me anything for that. I know. She held his gaze. That is why it matters. Then she turned and walked toward the waiting vehicle. Nathan remained at the gate as it disappeared down the road. He did not call after her. He did not order anyone to bring her back. For the first time since finding her in the forest, he had no way to protect her except by trusting her. 3 hours later, Grace sat in the back seat watching the mountains disappear behind her when her phone received an email from an address she did not recognize. Attached was a scanned document in her mother's handwriting. Grace opened it and stopped breathing. The first line read, If you are reading this, then you finally chose your own way home. Beneath it was a legal declaration Eleanor had signed 22 years earlier. Grace read the final paragraph twice. Then she immediately called Nathan. He answered before the second ring. Grace. Her voice trembled. Nathan, my mother left proof that Silver Ridge never legally belonged to any of them. Grace asked the driver to pull into the next rest area before she called Nathan back on video. Her hands were steady now, but her thoughts were moving faster than she could organize them. Nathan appeared on the screen from his office with Ethan beside him. Show us the document, Nathan said. Grace forwarded the file and waited while Ethan opened it on a secure computer. It is a declaration of custodial trust, Ethan said after several minutes. Eleanor transferred the remaining Silver Ridge rights into a private trust before the territory was dissolved. Grace leaned against the car. What does that mean? It means the 3 neighboring territories never gained permanent ownership of everything they claimed, Nathan said. And Daniel cannot restore Silver Ridge simply by obtaining your signature. Ethan continued reading. There is another condition. Grace alone controls whether the trust remains private, transfers its land rights, or supports restoration. No council can make that decision for her. Grace closed her eyes. Her mother had hidden the truth, but beneath every secret had been the same purpose. Choice. Who sent me the email? She asked. Ethan checked the message information. A law office in Denver. The instructions say the document was to be released only after you contacted them independently or formally left the protection of another territory. Grace almost laughed. My mother planned for everything. Apparently, she planned for you to become free before becoming powerful, Nathan said. The words stayed with Grace. She continued to Colorado, but she did not disappear. Over the next several days, she met with the attorneys who had managed the trust for more than 2 decades. Nathan never appeared without invitation. He called only when she called first, answered every question she asked, and refused every opportunity to influence her decision. Daniel's plan collapsed when the trust documents were authenticated. Red Hollow withdrew its claim after its false records became part of a formal investigation. Robert Hayes resigned from the council pending review of his actions. For the first time since Grace entered the forest, no one was chasing her toward a decision. That freedom felt almost frightening. A week later, Grace stood inside her small Colorado home surrounded by the ordinary pieces of the life she had built herself. Potted herbs lined the kitchen window. Gardening books covered the table. Her mother's old ceramic mug sat beside the sink. Nothing had changed, yet Grace had. She finally understood that returning to her old life did not require pretending the new truth had never happened. That evening, she called Nathan. I made a decision about Silver Ridge. There was a pause. Do you want to tell me? I am not restoring a kingdom. Nathan said nothing. The land will remain in trust. Some of it will become protected forest. Some will support local communities. No throne. No political marriage. No council deciding who I should become. Nathan's voice softened. That sounds like you. Grace smiled. There is something else. I am listening. I am coming back to Blackwood. Silence followed. Grace could almost picture him trying not to react too quickly. For the trust, he finally asked. No. For the investigation? No. Another pause. Then why? Grace looked toward the photograph of her mother resting on the kitchen shelf. Because leaving helped me understand the difference between having somewhere to hide and having somewhere I want to return to. 2 days later, Grace's car approached the Blackwood gates under a clear afternoon sky. Nathan stood waiting alone. No council. No ceremony. No guards surrounding him. Just Nathan. Grace parked and stepped out. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then Nathan smiled, fully this time. You came back. Grace walked toward him. I said I would. Actually, you said you were coming back. I have learned there is an important difference between intention and choice. Grace stopped in front of him, still frustratingly reasonable. I have been practicing. She laughed, and the sound carried across the open grounds. Nathan looked at her as though he had missed that sound more than he was prepared to admit. What happens now? He asked. Grace remembered the first time she had asked him that question inside the hunting cabin. Back then, she had been frightened, exhausted, and surrounded by secrets. Now the answer belonged entirely to her. Now, she said, we find out what happens when nobody is running. Nathan held out his hand, but did not reach for hers. Grace looked at it for one quiet moment before placing her hand in his by choice. 3 months later, the northern forest looked nothing like the place Grace remembered. Winter had loosened its grip on Blackwood, and sunlight filtered through the pines onto patches of melting snow. Grace stood beside the same tree where Nathan had found her, one hand resting against its rough bark. She had avoided this place since returning, not because she feared it, but because she wanted to come back when the memory no longer controlled her. Nathan waited several feet away, giving her the space she had never needed to request from him. It looked bigger that night, Grace said. Everything looks bigger when you are freezing. She glanced at him. That almost sounded like a joke. I have been practicing those too. Grace smiled. Much had changed since she returned. The investigation had cleared Nathan of any involvement in the decisions surrounding Silver Ridge, while Daniel Vale had formally withdrawn his restoration petition after the trust documents made his plan impossible. Grace had established an independent foundation to manage the protected land, and she had surprised nearly everyone by refusing a permanent seat on any governing council. Instead, she divided her time between her work with medicinal plants, the foundation, and Blackwood. Nathan never asked her to surrender one life for another. That was precisely why she kept choosing to share more of it with him. Do you remember what I said when you found me? She asked. Nathan's expression softened. Every word. I asked you not to let me die here. You did. Grace looked through the trees toward the distant ridge. For a while, I thought that was the reason I trusted you. Because you saved me. Nathan said nothing. He had learned that Grace sometimes needed silence more than answers. But you know what changed everything? She continued. You opened the gate. Nathan looked at her. That was considerably easier than carrying you through a snowstorm. For you? Grace shook her head. I do not think it was. She stepped closer. Everyone else who claimed to protect me had a plan for what I should become afterward. My mother wanted freedom for me, but even she had to hide the truth to give me a chance at it. Daniel wanted an heir. Red Hollow wanted legal control. The council wanted political stability. She paused. You wanted me to stay. Nathan did not deny it. More than I should probably admit. But you still let me leave. You were never mine to keep. Grace felt tears gather in her eyes, but this time they carried no fear. That is why I came back. Nathan held her gaze. Grace, I need you to understand something. Finding you changed my life, but you never owe me a place in yours. I know. She smiled through the emotion. You have told me that approximately 100 times. I wanted to be clear. You are always painfully clear. Nathan finally smiled. Grace reached for his hand. I did not come back because you saved my life. His fingers closed gently around hers. Then why did you? Because when I finally had complete freedom to choose where my life would go, I wanted part of it to lead here. To you. Nathan looked at her as though every title he carried had suddenly become irrelevant. I love you, Grace. The words were simple. No ceremony. No witnesses. No claim disguised as devotion. Grace had waited her entire life to understand the difference. I love you too. Months later, Grace would still keep her own work, her own decisions, and her legal independence. Nathan would still carry the responsibilities of Blackwood. They would disagree about his cooking, her habit of ignoring rest, and whether 6 hours of sleep counted as enough. But they would build something neither inherited from the people before them, something chosen. As they walked back through the forest together, Grace looked once over her shoulder at the tree where her old life had almost ended. Nathan had kept her alive that night, but the reason she loved him had come afterward, in every moment when he could have used his power to decide her future and chose instead to stand beside her while she decided it herself.